There's a new validation library out there that a lot of people are talking about that I wanted to try out. So this is called Zod. It's a TypeScript for schema validation with static type inference library. And I wanted to see if I can add it into a form. And so here's a form I've created. You can see here I added in some analysis that if the first name is too small, it gives an error. It also requires the address, some validity on the address as well. So I was playing around with this and I wanted to show you how easy it is to add into an application, but also how you can be able to use it with an existing validation library as well. So I have an application I created here. I'm using Vue and Vue 3. I'm going to do the npm install Zod first, npm izod. After that's installed, I'll go ahead and run the app, which I already installed it before I started here. So I'm going to run npm run dev. It's basically just a form. So I am using Tailwind CSS. I have some inputs in here. I have a V model for my form first name, last name, and address. So first I'm gonna import in Zod. And the way I like to do that is I do import star as Z from Zod. First I'm gonna create a schema. And the schema is basically going to be what I want the form to look like. And the schema can be an object. So let's call it form schema, and I'm going to use z dot, and of course I'm using TypeScript here, so I'm going to use object. So I'm going to put the first one as first name, and I'm going to use z dot string. From here I can add in other additional requirements that this string needs to have for this object. So I'm going to put minimum of 3, and I'm going to put a max of 50. Now one thing really nice about this is I can change the error text that it shows. And by the way, there's a whole bunch of other ones in here, like another one I could do non-empty, so it actually is not empty. You can see here, there's more though. If I just kind of scroll down here, they have stuff for brands, arrays, dates, emails, emojis, ends with, IPs, is emoji. So it has a lot of different options, even URLs that you can help with validations. And you can create your own validation as well. There's something called refine. Now, one thing I want to do too is for this 3, I want to have my own custom message. So I'm going to add another object here. You can see here one of the options is message. I'll say it needs to be at least 3 characters. I guess at least is 2 words, huh? At least 3 characters long. And so now I can go ahead and add in my other ones if I want. So I'll add in last name, z.string, and I don't know, I'll do the same thing. I'll do min 3, max 50, and then I'll do address as well. And with this form schema, I can just pass any object into it and parse it. And to do that, you can do form schema, and there's a couple of options here. One is called parse. There's also a safe parse, which is, I kind of like this a little bit better because then I can just have it return a truth value and then I can do something with it. And I'll show you how that works in a second. First, let's create a type for this and I can kind of see what it looks like. I'm going to call it a form schema. I don't really like having it the same name. I'm going to call it form schema type, I suppose. And then I'll do z.infer. And then I'll do type of, and that'll be the form schema. And now if you look here, this is basically what it created for me. It created this type with first name, last name, and address right here. And if I wanted to, now I can use this form schema wherever I need to. And I actually want it because I'm using Vue. I have this form here. I want to somehow capture errors. So I'm going to create an errors here. And in this errors, it's going to be ref. And I want it to be a type form schema. Well, basically, we're going to set it to null at the beginning. But I'm going to have it be the type z.zod. I think it's called Zod formatter. I had to look this up when I was doing it. Format error. And that's going to be type form schema type. And then it's giving me an error here that because null isn't that type. So what I like to do here is I just do other or null here. Now what I want to do is every time someone submits, I want to check to see if the submitted values are correct. Inside here, I'm going to see if it's valid. So I'm going to use that form schema that we just created. And then I'm going to use that safe parse. And then I'm going to pass in the values. Now I'm already having all of them inside this object here. So just passing the form.value should be enough to grab the whole value in. Now this is not a great name, valid. Maybe we put like valid schema. I don't know, maybe that's a little bit better. Not valid schema. So if this isn't, and then we have .success, so that means it went through, then there's a problem. So now I can do errors.value, and then I can look at this valid schema, and you see I have this error. So now I should be able to grab the errors that came because it was parsed through the safe parse and see what it shows here. And then I'm going to format it so that way it's in a nice format that I can see here. And else, and then this will have errors.value equal null. And so this should be enough to get me started, but I want to show the errors in my app. So right underneath the input here, I have this input. I need to add in some errors. So I'm going to add a div. I'm going to only show it if there is an error. So for this VIF, I'm going to do errors. I'm going to see that I have these errors here. So I also have address, first name, and last name. So we're in the first name. So I'm going to make sure I choose first name here. And then I'll do class. We know we want it red, and we're using Tailwind, so we'll make it 800. 800. We're actually going to have a v4 here. So this is going to be an array of errors. So it's going to be error in errors dot, let's see, first name dot underscore errors. So that's an array. And then we should be able to show the error here. And that should be it for the first name. So I'm going to copy and paste this and add this to the other three real quickly. Okay, so I went ahead and saved it. So now every time I do a submission, I'm going to check the schema and then set the errors. So let's see if it works. So I'm just put one letter here. I'm going to put a longer last name. Don't do address. Cool. So I see needs to be at least characters long. So if I come back up here, it needs to be at least, let's add 3. If I try this again, and I add something in here, yep, needs to be at least 3 characters long. String must contain at least characters. Cool. So it's working as we expected. Now we have this validation in place. So next thing I want to show you guys is how you would integrate in Zod with an existing form library. On the Vue side, I really like Veelidate and also Formic. I'm just, for the sake of this video, I know Veelidate a little bit better, so I'm going to show you how to do it with this. If you're in the React ecosystem, I think React Hook Form works well, and both of these have plugins that you can use with Zod. I went ahead and updated my app here, so I have this new component called with form lib, and I installed a few libraries here. I installed this Veelidate and this Veelidate Zod library using npm install. And this is all in the directions if you want to do this yourself. Instead of typing this out, I'm just going to kind of explain the code to you. So this looks very similar to our Zod object that we created earlier with this form schema. The difference here is that we have to use this toType schema, which is a function that you pull out of Veelidate/Zod. That's a library you install, and you surround the whole schema by it, and it creates this validation schema object of typed schema. Then what you have to do is you take this validation schema and you pass it into this use form. So you have to import in use form from Veelidate and use field. You can grab in errors and handle submit out of this use form here, and you have this validation schema, and this will connect things up for you. And the last thing you have to do is with this use field, you create a use field for every single, this is almost like creating the refs I did in this earlier example where I created this ref object. Well, now I'm creating these use fields for our first name, last name, and address. And I'm surrounding the whole, I'm creating this first name, last name, and address from it. And then I use this V model and I add it to it. So here's my first name, here's my last name, and my address. And then for my onSubmit, the onSubmit here is the one I pulled out of this handle submit. So this handle submit is coming from use form. So it's a little roundabout way of doing it. But we basically have this onSubmit function. It's basically an arrow function to this handle submit that comes from here. And this will do the validation for you. And what's really nice about it is it also handles the values that are coming out of it. It won't trigger it unless the validation is accepted. So it won't trigger your handle submit at all. Obviously, there's ways of getting around this if you didn't like it like that. but it's really handy. And one thing you can do too is this handle submit has more values out of here. So if you wanted to, you can also reset the field, reset the form. There's set errors, set field errors, set field touch, set values. But it's pretty nice to do this. But let's see if this works. So this is just a little bit of a change than we had before, but we're still using Zod. If I come back over here to my app, refresh it. So now you can see it also by default, it's doing on change or change handler or input handler. So it's doing on every letter case. We can change that default if we wanted to, but it's kind of nice. And if we submit it, here it is. This is the object that it comes from the handle submit. Now, if there's something wrong here, it's not going to send. We could also, if we wanted to, have the send look grayed out. I prefer, I think accessibility wise to not gray out submit buttons when your form isn't valid. If I had to use a validation library, which I've done in different projects, and I was creating something quickly, I think I would try first with just Zod only to see if I can get away with it. But if I needed a little bit more functionality, then I would bring in Veelidate or Formic and use the Zod plugin, because I just think it's really powerful right now, especially for all these different types of validation that you can do for your app. Now, there's one more last thing I want to show you. And also, I'll leave a link to this code below if you want to look in more detail. But I think it'd be nice and it'd be interesting to take this form that we just created and actually have it actually be submitted to somewhere. So I'm going to use AWS Amplify. I'm going to set that up real quickly and I'll show you what it looks like. So first I'm going to log into my AWS console. If you don't already have a login and you want to get a free account, I'll put a link in the description. Just click on it, sign up, and you'll get a 100% free account, which has a lot of, basically you can get hundreds of hours for free. I'm going to click on and search, if you don't see it, AWS Amplify. And I'm going to use something called AWS Amplify Studio, which makes it really simple to create a full back end. So after I create Studio, I'm going to create a new app, build an app. I'm going to call it the Zod app. I'm going to click Confirm Deployment, and this will just take a moment. Once the deployment's finished, click Launch Studio. So this is our Studio app. So it's pretty straightforward to add in a data component. It's going to use AppSync, which is going to save our data in a GraphQL type database. Just for the heck of it, I'm going to add authentication. So I'm just going to leave it all the defaults. I just clicked on auth. It's going to allow users to log in by email. I'm going to click deploy. I'm going to click confirm deployment. All right, we're going to save this for later. I'm going to copy this string. Now for the data, since we're going to have a form model, I'm just going to call it forms. Let's call this shipping info. And then we're going to add a couple of ones in here. First, I'm going to have a first name. I'm going to leave it type string. We're going to have a last name and then also an address. And here I can do a whole bunch of things if I want. I can set up only authenticated users can update, create, read, or update or delete. I can add some special authorization rules. I'm just going to leave it all default for this quick demo. So I'm going to click Save and Deploy. Okay, so now we have deployed our data model and our authentication. So we just need to bring it into our app. We're going to go in here. I'm going to install a few things. AWS Amplify UI Vue. If you're in React, it's UI-React. And AWS Amplify. This will just take a second. And then I need to make sure I have the latest and greatest of the Amplify CLI. And to install that, that's do AWS npm I AWS Amplify CLI tac G. And this will make sure I have the latest version of Amplify CLI. And I already have it installed, so I won't run this. So I'm just going to take this command here. I'm going to copy it. And then I'm going to paste it here. And this will go ahead and install everything into our app. Okay, so I went ahead and did that through the magic of video editing. It's installed and I made a few changes and I'll show you here in a sec. So if I go into my Vite config, I added in this alias, which this is mentioned in the docs. I'll link the docs below, but you have to add in this find runtime config. And also in my index.html, I added this window.global undefined, so make sure it found everything. And then I had to do a little bit of configuration. So the only thing I had to do there is inside the main TS file, I imported Amplify from AWS Amplify, and then I imported in, hey, in the video, buddy. Hey, I'm in the video. Close the door. Come here and say hi. Hello. Okay, back out. I imported in this AWS exports from AWS exports. I also imported an Amplify from AWS Amplify, and I ran this configure command. And so what happened is, as soon as I ran that command to import in, it created this Amplify folder. And in the source folder, it created this file called AWS exports. And that was all done by that pull command that we did earlier. And once I did that, I just set it up here. Now inside my form library, I imported in a few things here. So I imported in this create forms input and this GraphQL query. If you look right here, every time you do a submit now, I'm running this, I'm grabbing the form details. I'm creating this object. I'm using this type called create forms input. It's from .API, so that way I make sure I have the right type. And then I'm running this GraphQL query that basically takes this mutation, which is from this GraphQL mutations. That's one thing you also have to do is you do amplify codegen add, and this will generate all the mutations, everything you need for your GraphQL service. So if I look inside GraphQL, I have this mutations file, and I have these queries and subscriptions. So this amplify codegen add, which has an E at the end actually, adds it in for you. And then inside here, I just have to run this command, which runs this create forms mutations. I pass in the query, and then I put in these details, and then it goes ahead and adds it to the GraphQL database. And then I wanted to make sure that when the app ran, that you had to log in first. So inside my app view file, I added in this with this style from Amplify UI view styles.css. I also imported in the authenticator from this library. And then I surrounded my whole application by it. And I added this basically a sign out button as well. So that way you had to be logged in. So let's see how that works. All right, so this is what it looks like out of the box. This is the authenticator. I can certainly, if I need to, change the look and feel of this. But I'm just gonna go ahead and create a quick login here. It's gonna ask me a code, so I'm gonna pull that up on my phone and put the code in. Cool, now I'm logged in. Here's my sign out button. So let me see if I can add stuff to the database. So I'm gonna put in John Smith, 15 Sycamore Street, somewhere, New York. I'm gonna hit enter. So it's sent the data to our backend. So let's check our backend to see if it's there. So I'm back in Studio here. I can click on content and I can see everything that's been added to the database. So here it is. If I click on it, John Smith, somewhere in New York, I can make changes to it, edit it, and I can also use this later on in different places in my app. So I've created a Zod form. I'm using Amplify to host in the backend. If you have any questions, leave a comment below. Thanks.